The Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were some of the most significant pieces of legislation to relieve the oppressive chains placed upon African Americans in the United States. Although these laws were greatly influential because of the rights it provided to African Americans, it did not immediately give them equal footing to their white counterpart. After the Civil War, laws such as the Jim Crow laws were implemented in order to impose restrictions upon the African Americans. These laws, along with the racism against African Americans, perpetuated segregation in the United States. In the 1998 landmark court case, Plessy v. Ferguson, the Supreme Court found segregation to be constitutional. The phrase "separate but equal" was used as a justification for segregation in the United States. This had two severe consequences on education. First, segregated schools were more often underfunded and by consequence undersupplied than white schools. Second, this had a psychological effect on colored students. From the words of Judge Earl Warren, who served in Brown v. Board of Education, segregation of white and colored students in public schools has a detrimental effect upon the colored students. The impact is greater when it has sanctions of the law, for the policy of separation of the races is usually interpreted for denoting the inferiority of the Negro group. A sense of inferiority affects motivation of children to learn, says Judge Earl Warren. Although the case found segregation to be unconstitutional, it spurred resistance, especially in the South. This reaction showed that laws that kept restricting African Americans were not the source of the problem. Instead, it was the racism of the people who placed and defended those laws. This is the problem that Martin Luther King wanted to expose and eradicate so that all, regardless of race, could equally share in the fruits of their society.
Martin Luther King Jr. was born January 15, 1929, as Michael Luther King Jr., but later had his name changed to Martin. His grandfather began the family's long tenure as pastors of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, serving from 1914 to 1931. His father has served from then until the present, and from 1960 until his death, Martin Luther acted as co-pastor. Martin Luther attended segregated public schools in Georgia, graduated from high school at the age of 15. He received his bachelor's degree in 1948 from Morehouse College, a distinguished Negro institution of Atlanta from which both his father and grandfather had graduated. After 3 years of theological study at Crosser Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, where he was elected president of predominantly white senior class, he was awarded the BD in 1950 with a fellowship won at Crosser. He enrolled in graduate studies at Boston University, completing his residence for the doctorate in 1953 and receiving the degree in 1955. In Boston, he met and married Coretta Scott, a young woman of uncommon intellectual and artistic attainments. 2 sons and 2 daughters were born into the family. In 1954, Martin Luther King became pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Always a strong worker for civil rights for members of his race, King was by this time a member of the Executive Committee of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the leading organization of its kind in the nation. He was ready, then early in December 1955, to accept the leadership of the first great Negro nonviolent demonstration of contemporary times in the United States. The bus boycott described by Gunnar Jan in his presentation. The boycott lasted 382 days. On December 21, 1956, after the Supreme Court of the United States had declared unconstitutional the laws requiring segregation on buses, Negroes and whites rode the buses as equals. During these days of boycott, King was arrested, his home was bombed, he was subjected to personal abuse, but at the same time, he emerged as a Negro leader of the first rank. In 1957, he was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization formed to provide new leadership for the now civil rights movement. The ideals for this organization he took from Christianity, its operational techniques from Gandhi in the 11-year period between 1957 and 1968. King traveled over 6 million miles and spoke over 2,500 times, appearing wherever there was injustice, protest, and action, and meanwhile he wrote 5 books as well as numerous articles. In these years, he led a massive protest in Birmingham, Alabama that caught the attention of the entire world, providing what he called a coalition of conscience, and inspiring his Letters from Birmingham Jail, a manifesto of the Negro Revolution. He planned the drives in Alabama for the registration of Negroes as voters. He directed the peaceful march on Washington, D.C. of 250,000 people to whom he delivered his address, I Have a Dream. He conferred with President John F. Kennedy and campaigned for President Lyndon B. Johnson. He was arrested upwards of 20 times and assaulted at least 4 times. He was awarded 5 honorary degrees, was named Man of the Year by Time magazine in 1963, and became not only the symbolic leader of American blacks, but also a world figure. At the age of 35, Martin Luther King Jr. was the youngest man to have received the Nobel Peace Prize. When notified of his election, he announced that he would turn over the prize money of $54,123 to the fourth adherents of the Civil Rights Movement. On the evening of April 4th, 1968, while standing on the balcony of his motel room in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was to lead a protest march in sympathy with striking garbage workers of that city, he was assassinated.
Although the Civil Rights Act of 1964 legally desegregated the South, discrimination was still rampant in certain areas, making it very difficult for blacks to register to vote. In 1965, an Alabama city became the battleground in the fight for suffrage. Despite violent opposition, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his followers pressed forward on an epic march from Selma to Montgomery, and their efforts culminated in President Lyndon Johnson signing the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Selma shows the evolution of change while beaming a spotlight on the stunted growth for that which has not changed. Its timelessness in a spine-chilling reminder that those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. Its story provides a blueprint not only of the past, but of the way forward. There's a reason why Ava DuVernay's film is called Selma and not King. Like Spielberg's Lincoln, Selma is as much about the procedures of political maneuvering in fighting and bargaining as it is about the chief orchestrator of the resulting deals. Selma affords Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. the same human characteristics of humor, frustration, and exhaustion that Lincoln provided its president. This relatable humanity elevates King's actions and his efforts. It inspires by suggesting that reverence for Dr. King was bestowed on a person no different than any of us. If he can provoke change, we have no excuse not to as well. During the fight for voter rights, King has several meetings with President Johnson. Their scenes and Johnson's scenes with J. Edgar Hoover focus on the political gamemanship required to bring about change. Selma points out the media's role in influencing the hearts and minds of the American people and how easily that can be manipulated. King knows about this media power and how his team handles it as a precursor to today's social media shenanigans. This is an emotional movie that aims to anger, sadden, and inspire viewers, sometimes in the same scene. Selma takes no prisoners, and while it welcomes moviegoers of all hues, it has no intention of sugarcoating its horrors for politically correct comforting. This film, one of the year's best, is an announcement of a major talent in Miss DuVernay's, but its core message will not be lost nor hidden by the accolades it receives. Through the noise, Selma speaks to us. From the top of the hill of progress, it is just as easy to slide down backwards as it is to move forward. Attention must be paid. Selma points out the media's role in influencing the hearts and minds of the American people and how easily that can be manipulated. King knows about his media power and how his team handles it as a precursor to today's social media.
Martin Luther King will always be remembered as a hero who fought for those in need. He is not only one of the most recognized people throughout history, but shaped history for the better. As seen in the movie Selma, he never took no for an answer or gave up. This leading Martin Luther King to lead a civil rights movement that internally improved the landscape of America, including our education system. As he said in one of his speeches on March 14, 1964, when he accepted the John Dewey Award from the United Federation of Teachers, the walling off of Negroes from equal education is part of the historical design to submerge him in a second-class status. Therefore, as Negroes have struggled to be free, they have had to fight for the opportunity for a decent education. Although he didn't directly help in the case Brown versus Board of Education, it is said that the decision to desegregate schools was one that he celebrated. Today we will stop to celebrate and commemorate everything that Mr. King fought for and achieved. The desegregation of schools was a small leap to where public schools are now, but it drastically changed the public school system as a whole. This giving equal opportunities to every child despite the color of their skin. not only speaking about an equal education, but an education as a whole. As seen in a piece King wrote for the Morehouse College student newspaper called The Purpose of Education, the most interesting thing being when he spoke about the power of character as opposed to intelligence, his exact words being, "We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. The complete education gives one not only power of concentration, but worthy objectives upon which to concentrate. The broad education will therefore transmit to one not only the accumulated knowledge of race, but also the accumulated experience of social living." These words still applying to our education system now as we see the various things that should be changed. Although the education system continues to have flaws, it is evident that Mr. King would be proud to see as to how far it's come. Many schools across the nation not only accepting, but embracing a multicultural education.